So far in this forensic unit, we've discussed a wide range of reasons why people may display offending behaviour. But what can we actually do about it? Can we actually reduce offending in society? In this final forensic video, we're going to look at 4 ways of dealing with offending behaviour: custodial sentencing, behaviour modification, anger management, and restorative justice. Psychboost.com, over 170 videos to help you with your qualification, and Patreon supporters can access bonus resources, tutorial videos, and the Discord channel. Custodial sentences. Our first way of dealing with offenders is the first thing you would think of: putting them in prison or a secure facility like a young offenders institute, or perhaps for some criminals a psychiatric hospital. There are a few reasons why we might want to lock criminals away. Firstly, the punishment might deter crimes, either stopping the individual from committing more crimes when they get out, or as an example to stop other members of society committing crimes. A second reason is to protect society. The criminal might be violent or could be stealing property. By locking them away, they can't repeat that behaviour in wider society, at least until they get out. The third is probably what most people think of the aim of prison is: simply a punishment, a retribution for the harm they cause to their victim or society as a whole. And finally, we have rehabilitation. This is an attempt to change the criminal while in prison. This might be learning a new non-criminal skill that they can use for work, or changing their behavioural responses. So those are the aims of custodial sentences, but we also need to be able to discuss some of the psychological effects of being in prison. As you can imagine, being in prison is a frightening environment. It's easy to feel helpless and stressed, and this can lead to depression. And this is very evident in the high levels of self-harm and suicide that we see in the prison population. Institutionalization is when we adopt the rules and regulations of an institution. So for example, if someone's in prison for so long that when they're outside of that institution, they might struggle to adapt to a normal life, perhaps feeling more comfortable back in the institution. De-individuation is the sense of losing our individual identity. We feel so much a part of the group that we're more likely to copy that group's actions, even violent actions. That's one explanation of why a peaceful protest can turn into a riot. Prisons actually increase the sense of de-individuation by making all prisoners wear the same uniform. And a final concept we need to know is recidivism. This term just means that after an offender is released, if they go on to commit another crime. Now, there are a range of reasons people might offend again. Perhaps they've become institutionalized and can't cope in the outside world. Maybe they've developed their pro-criminal attitudes and skills while inside. But also, life is difficult for ex-prisoners. They may struggle to find work, and both homelessness and drug addiction are common in ex-prisoners and risk factors. Recidivism is a really big problem in the UK. A large study by the Ministry of Justice followed thousands of prisoners over 18 years. 77% of those ex-inmates eventually went on to reoffend. Let's use that study as an evaluation. It was published in 2020, and that 77% figure suggests that custodial sentences fail on both the aim of deterrence — fear of another prison sentence didn't stop them from reoffending — and the aim of reforming. They didn't stop their offending behaviour, it only incapacitated them for the time that they were in prison, providing pretty limited protection to the public. But there is an interesting aspect to the data. The reoffending rates for short sentences of less than 6 months were much higher, at 84.9%, than for prisoners who had sentences of 4 years or more, at 32.2%. So perhaps it could be that short sentences are just not long enough to deter or reform prisoners. But after learning about differential association, we can consider custodial sentencing to be, in theory, completely counterproductive. We could just be reinforcing pro-criminal attitudes by putting lots of people with pro-criminal attitudes together, giving them an opportunity to share criminal skills and opinions. And a separate point is the massive expense of the prison system. The figure for locking up a single prisoner in 2020 is £42,000 a year. With recidivism rates so high and prisoners likely to return soon after being released, it really should be questioned if there are not more effective and less costly ways of reducing crime. But in custodial sentences' favour, it has the support of the public. It's politically popular to use custodial sentences, likely because it's seen as a suitable punishment or effectively appropriate vengeance for the crimes committed. Any other option is often criticised as a soft option, just not punishing enough. I mean, if they did the crime, they should do the time. Behaviour modification. This way of dealing with offending behaviour is based on learning theory. As you likely remember, behaviourists think all behaviours have been learnt through interaction with the environment, and that includes offending behaviour. So behaviour modification attempts to use the same processes to give the criminal non-offending behaviour. Operant conditioning shows how behaviour can be modified with the use of reinforcement and punishment. Prisons who run a token economy system use these principles to modify behaviour. It works like this. Certain behaviours that the prison guards want to change are targeted, meaning the behaviours you want are clearly defined. So perhaps it's cleaning up after yourself in the prison canteen or obeying the guard's orders immediately. If the prisoner demonstrates the target behaviour, they're given a token. And this token acts as a secondary reinforcer, meaning it can be traded later on for what the prisoner really wants. And this could be a treat from the prison shop or saved up for a larger reward. From this process, the prisoner learns that performing positive behaviour is rewarding, and hopefully they become conditioned into repeating that behaviour. Punishment can be used, so if the prisoner shows bad behaviour, they can have tokens taken off them to discourage the bad behaviour. And in operant conditioning language, this is negative punishment. There is research that shows token economies can be effective. Hobbs and Holt ran a token economy system with most of the criminals in a young offenders institution. They lived in 4 different buildings, and one group of prisoners acted as a control group, and they didn't take part. The researchers found that the staff's assessment of behaviour showed a significant improvement in the offenders who took part in the token economy scheme. But the token economy system is pretty limited. It may work in reducing behavioural problems while they're in the controlled setting like a prison, but when the prison's released, without the reward system in place, behaviour is just likely to revert back to criminal behaviour. That's because, back in their normal lives, criminals will have the same reward system that led them to offend in the first place. So it's not on its own going to reduce recidivism. That being said, prisons are places where criminal activity takes place, and if token economies can make prisons easier to manage for the guards, it's a useful technique. Also, once a target's behaviours have been set up, it only requires the guards to be consistent in giving out the rewards. So no highly trained staff are needed, and it's not an expensive system to maintain. Anger management. This approach takes a cognitive perspective to offending behaviour. It assumes criminal violence is due to emotional responses, and these come from irrational thoughts. The logic is, if the prisoners can learn to control their thoughts in stressful situations, and ultimately their emotions, they won't be violent when they're released. And there are 3 stages of anger management programs that we need to know. The first is the cognitive preparation stage, and this is where the offender learns how to reflect on their own thoughts and find what triggers their aggression. The psychologist will do this by getting the offender to consider examples from their own lives when they lost control. The second stage is skills acquisition. The psychologist will teach techniques like relaxation exercise or communication skills that the offender can use when trying to control their anger. The hope is the offender can use these skills to avoid conflict in the future. And the third stage is the application practice stage. This is a role play. The therapist will actually try to put the offender in a stressful position that would, in the past, have led to an aggressive outburst. And the offender needs to take all the skills they developed so far to stay calm and not react emotionally. Ireland conducted a study into the effectiveness of an anger management program. The participants and control group completed self-assessment questionnaires, and their behaviour was recorded by staff on a checklist. After receiving the intervention, 48% of the experimental group showed an improvement on both measures, with no improvement in the control group. Interestingly, the biggest improvement in behaviour was with the prisoners identified as the most aggressive. Now, often studies like Ireland will use self-report measures, and there are a range of problems. But one of the main issues is a desire to give the best impression of yourself as possible, social desirability bias. This might have been an even bigger problem in the second self-report measure, as many of the prisoners may have been trying to get early release and wanted to show they'd engaged in anger management program and had seen an improvement, so they were no longer a danger to society. But if they do work, a positive of anger management programs is these techniques are good life skills. Offenders can use them to improve their personal relationships and might even improve their relationships with people at work and help them retain employment. Restorative justice. Rehabilitation is the focus of restorative justice. And the aim is, by getting the offender to understand the harm they've caused to their victim, they're not going to want to repeat their crimes again in the future. There is a hope that in some way that the harm the offender caused to the victim can be restored. This might be repairing the emotional harm or financial harm. An aspect of this is reconciliation, so it might be a cash payment or performing some sort of act, even something as small as sitting and listening to the victim's experience. Now, there doesn't always have to be a meeting between the offender and victim. Letters can be used instead, but it is very likely that they'll get the chance to talk to each other face to face. The meeting is supervised by a highly trained mediator, and the tone of the meeting is collaboration, and the victim is given the chance to explain their experience and the harm that was caused to them. The offender can explain their story, but is encouraged to take responsibility for their actions. This acceptance of responsibility can take the form of reparations, so maybe a cash payment or completing community service. The effectiveness of free restorative justice schemes were assessed by the Ministry of Justice. Three of the findings were, firstly, a 14% reduction in reoffending by the criminals who took part. Secondly, 62% of the victims who took part felt better for taking part in their experience, compared to only 2% who felt worse. And third, that restorative justice is cost effective because of the reduction in reoffending. They worked out for every £1 spent on restorative justice, that led to £8 being saved from the prison system. But there are limitations. It not only depends on the offender wanting to take part, but also the willingness of the victim. Many victims may not want to accept the process, as they might feel that the offender will just play along, trying to avoid a custodial sentence. I've dealt with all the ways of dealing with offending behaviour in just one video. I think it's most likely if a long essay question comes up in this area, you'll be able to include a range of techniques. Or if they ask about just one, it'll be a shorter essay question. But it is possible that you could be asked to write a longer essay question about just one. For that, you might want more evaluations than I've given you so far. And I think the best route for evaluation then is to bring in the other ways of dealing with offending behaviour as comparisons. So for example, if there's evidence that other forms of dealing with offending behaviour are effective in some way, mention that evidence and suggest it as an alternative. Or mention that as you're doing one technique, it doesn't stop you from doing the others. Maybe the best option is to use a holistic combined approach. We can compare the effects of each approach. Due to the high reoffending rates, custodial sentences don't seem to have long-term behavioural changes, along with behaviour modification. But anger management and restorative justice do have longer-term positive effects on personal relationships and lower reoffending rates. But both of these require trained staff that there may not be funding for. Finally, there's the practical point that many members of society want offenders to face long custodial sentences. The more unpleasant, the better for punishment. Seeing offenders given treats or shorter sentences for taking part in therapeutic programs might be seen as unacceptable. I guess the reality is, prison policy is made by politicians whose focus is public opinion, not psychologists. Here's a real forensic exam question on dealing with offending behaviour. Give it a go and see how you do. I want to give a quick thank you to everybody who supports this channel over on Patreon. A quick reminder, if you are a PsychBoost patron at the neuron level and above, you can access 6 forensic tutorial videos over on psychboost.com. I'll talk you through a model answer for the exam question and give you some general exam tips. Synapse patrons can access a printable forensic poster, a 90-question quiz sheet covering the entire unit, and an essay table. For everyone else, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the videos released right to your exams. And I will see you in the next PsychBoost video.